welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings you the law, the Constitution, and the events of the day to you each month. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have an up-and-coming Congress person that will be elected out of the 1st District of Missouri. Myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski. Mark, why don't you introduce our guest?
Okay, Winnie Heartstrong is running for Congress. And tonight, we kind of got here into the last minute, but we're going to talk a little about immigration, maybe a little bit about the Flynn case, and then I think Winnie has some strong opinions on the monuments we had here in San Francisco, where Francis Scott Key's monument, he wrote the Star Spangled Banner, was torn down. So maybe we'll go through the first couple subjects kind of quickly because those are kind of legal, technical things, and then we'll let her take in that last subject. But Winnie, why don't we start out? Give me give the audience a little background about where you're from, what made you decide to run for Congress, and what was your inspiration to want to run for Congress?
Hello, Mark and James. Thank you so much for having me on. I, tried to take the LSAT and bombed it terribly. This was in the year 2009. And I knew from then on that I was called to do other things, which is learn how to be an advocate, learn how to study logic, and learn how to piece together evidence to make a claim sound reasonable or unreasonable. And that's what I've done. I've taken my teaching and my skills in rhetoric. I taught public speaking for many years at the University of Maryland, where I got my PhD in communication, specifically political rhetoric, political communication. And so when I saw what was obviously a very contrived event happen in the city of my birth in Minneapolis, I put all that together and I put my little red MAGA hat on. And I don't know if you saw the video of me that went viral in the MAGA hat. And I said to America, stop being so emotional. Why are you crying? What are you crying about? Okay, someone was killed somewhere far away from where you are. So why is that suddenly making you want to take to the streets and tear things down and burn things down? And I am guessing that video has now reached the ends of the earth because I've had people from as far as South Africa reach out to me to talk about that video. I have people from Europe, all across Europe, despite the language barrier. My video was transcribed and closed captioned in Spain, and people in Spain have been reaching out. I have people in the Netherlands who have reached out. And you know why they're doing that? They want America to get this race crisis right, because the archetype of white and black racial strife has now been transported abroad. Even though Ireland, I have good friends in Ireland now. Ireland has no race problem that we know of, but the issue with George Floyd's death has been taken up and put in the Irish media, and now the Irish people are being told that they have a race problem. So we need to get this issue right. I know we'll talk about some other things according to your outline there. We'll talk more specifically about that. But as a way of introducing myself, I think this is how the world has come to know me, and this is how America has come to know me. I embrace that heartily. But my entry into politics was really very, very personal and had nothing at all to do with racial issues. It's really for the unborn. I'm doing this because my mom, during her pregnancy for me, had considered an abortion very seriously. So seriously that she had an appointment with an abortion doctor, and she went to the appointment with my aunt and was determined to abort the baby, me. And luckily for her, it was 1989 in Minnesota. And at that time, when the establishment said that they wanted abortion safe, legal, and rare, they meant it. So when women wanted to see an ultrasound, they were given the chance to do that. So my mother had the presence of mind, praise God, to ask the abortionist to see the ultrasound, because those ultrasound machines are typically in the room there. They use it to guide the procedure, but they don't always show it to the woman. So my mother is a very strong woman. She has a master's in computer science, was a mid-level bank executive back in West Africa for several years. And she said, well, I want to see the ultrasound. And she sealed her fate in that move, because she saw the baby, me, wiggling my toes and waving my fingers, she said, and that changed her mind. So she flew off the examination table and flew off there for her dear life and my dear life. And here I am today. So
Thank
if my
God.
mom, amen, praise God, if she hadn't had the courage to do that, then I don't know if I would be alive today. But here I am, and we know many, many children don't survive that procedure. We know that every minute, every hour, Planned Parenthood kills the approximate size of a kindergarten classroom. So think about it, killing a kindergarten classroom since 1973, that's millions of people who should be alive today who are not alive today. So this is my impetus for coming into politics, as
Well,
opposed to going on.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but today the Supreme Court actually came down with some rulings that dealt with the same subject, and remarkably enough, the rulings were like 7-2 over the Little Sisters of the Poor, or whatever, that group, and who've been fighting this forever. And there seems to be a pushback, maybe a groundswell. Now, they did suspend the Alabama law on that when they're talking about, remember the Alabama law, which they just came out with last week, saying, nah, you can't really make somebody have admitting privileges to a hospital. But you can see a wave. You can see a wave that is, thank God, taking back the solemnness of life. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's a very
No,
sensitive
that's
subject to
perfect,
me.
James. That's perfect, because I was going to say my tagline, I usually have a pithy quote that I come up with before I go into an interview. And my quote for your show today was, "The law is madness. It is like an insane asylum musical dance." And then every so often, out of the chaos, you have some sound rulings, as opposed to when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments and all the precepts that the Israelites should follow. That was order out of chaos. Now we just have chaos, 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 and every so often we have sound teaching, because the law is a teacher. The law is a teaching tool, which is why I could never get myself to be good enough to go to law school, because it seemed like you had to make so many compromises about good teaching in order to do the job of being an attorney. But anyway, kudos to you guys. You guys get it. But yes, the Supreme Court ruling today was very encouraging.
My quote would be what Napoleon said. He says, "There's so many laws. I'm surprised they haven't hanged everybody." Okay, well, let's start a little bit on immigration. We had a big thing that happened here that I thought, for the California and the USA citizen taxpayer, Governor Newsom has this thing, and he says, if you're a good Christian, you should want open borders and let everyone over the borders. So he paid basically whoever wants to come over $75 million to come to California and vote. That's $75 million. And it was supposed to be for COVID-19, but I think it was to buy votes. And so, but just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're a patsy. And that's actually a betrayal of his constituents, right? And if you're a Christian, betrayers, according to Dante, go to the ninth circle of hell, which is interesting that it's a frozen lake. I got a feeling maybe Dante had a cold apartment or something. He definitely wasn't a skier. But it's kind of interesting. And then Frankenstein had the frozen lake too. That's how he fell in the frozen lake. But anyway, Christians don't have to always cuddle up with strangers and let them break into their house. So, I mean, I think that's a big thing that's come on, that everyone says, well, you should be nice and let, everybody over the border. Well, you can't let everybody over the border. And it's also not fair because we have a lot of, indigents and vagrants and people without jobs here that aren't being taken care of. And to give, just anyone who wants to come over the border $75 million of taxpayer money when California is in debt, I think that's a betrayal. So what do you think about immigration in general? What's your thoughts on immigration?
Oh, wow, Mark, that's a good question. My family is an immigrant family, a very recent immigrant family too, because my parents came to the US in the 80s. My father is a retired Secret Service officer for a country in West Africa that will remain unnamed for safety reasons. But he and my mom decided that they wanted to have an American life, and they came here legally. And over the last 30 years, they've gone back and forth. So actually, I have a British education from West Africa. And then I came back to the US for college. So I was born in Minneapolis, but I've lived everywhere. And I understand that as we evolve as a human race, that the convenience of modern travel will make it easier for us to choose where we would like to build our lives and build our families. But in this modern equation, we have to take into account certain things. That scarcity is the real enemy. We have scarce resources that do not permit for every single person who would like to, let's say, live in Japan, in Tokyo, to do so. And so the Japanese government will have to do things to make it difficult for the whole world to end up in Tokyo. We know Tokyo is a beautiful, developing city. I have a relative who will be going there for his graduate studies. So my family is very international, like I said. And that's beautiful because he likes the Japanese language. He would like to go there and live there. The same has been the case for the United States for centuries. However, as we evolve, we also need to obey the laws of the land. The laws of the land have created stipulations for how to come into America. We have the diversity lottery visa. We have relatives sponsoring their relatives to come into the United States. There you go. But even then, it serves a benefit, right? Because then you can be documented. We know who you are. We know that if you suddenly fall into poverty, we have a relative who has vowed that they will take care of you. We know that there are people that you can rely on as a safety net because there's paperwork that has everyone's contact who filed for you to come to America. So even there, we shouldn't have scores of immigrants on our in our safety net programs.
Well,
Those programs.
If you look at some of the Bear Stearns and some of the economic analysis of illegal aliens or foreign infiltrators, what do you want to call them, spies, there's about 50 million at large in the United States right now. And we've got a population of about 300 million. And so a sixth of our population we don't know who they are, right?
Yeah.
And they also tend to end up mostly in our prisons. Because a lot of people, like say from Mexico, I'm familiar with some of the Mexican immigration, and a lot of those people, if they stayed in their country, they'd be hung because they've murdered people down there. So this is the only place they can run to, and they can do it. They can murder here and then buy some more papers for $50. They've got nothing to lose, and so you're kind of in a rough situation if you're a tax-paying citizen. You're up against someone who's wanted for murder in their home company. They've done a couple of murders here. And if you get a confrontation with them in the street, they're not going to want to be taken to jail because they don't want to get deported because then they'll get hung. So these people are desperados, and you've got 50 million of them. So we've got a little bit of a problem. And I understand that, everyone, there's different types of immigration coming in. But basically since 1965, they've opened the floodgates to anybody or nobody. Now, kind of the joke is, the problem with our southern border, if you look at the map, it's a dotted line, and anybody can kind of go through the spaces.
The spaces in between.
Between the dots.
That's our problem, is that dotted line there. So really what we'd have to do is make the border shorter. If we invaded Mexico and Central America and our border was on Panama, it'd be pretty easy to protect. But we have a 3,000-mile border, and that's a big problem. And also you have a lot of folks like Newsom, who I think most of his voters, in California, about half of the population of El Salvador lives in San Francisco or LA, right?
Wow, that's huge.
13. And so they all vote Democrat, and they say there's no voter fraud, but that's just not true. Most of the illegal aliens are voting Democrat, and it's not really fair to citizens, for one thing, to tax us and say, here's 75 million to pay these guys to come in and vote, and then to have, let's say, 10, 15 million, illegal aliens in California, probably 5 million of them voting, and most of them, probably not making enough to support themselves. And so if you're a poor U.S. citizen, you can't go to a hospital. You don't get these benefits because they've already been taken up. So I think it's a huge thing for Americans right now. It's like, why is a sixth of our population basically foreign infiltrators? And I think it's huge. I think it's huge because you see people, indigents and vagrants on the street. But $75 million, for $75 million, you could have taken care of every single indigent and vagrant on the street. California.
Amen.
And
Amen.
that's
Yeah.
not happening. So I just think that Newsom really betrayed us. But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on the immigration. On the next thing we have, Jim, I wanted to talk a little bit about Flynn.
About what?
General Flynn, and he got in trouble because he kind of clashed with Hillary Clinton over the whole Africa. and Middle East
General, you're talking about General Flynn.
Yeah, General Flynn, and he got in
Okay.
trouble with the Clintons because he didn't agree with them on basically the European becoming Islamic, right? And so they really had it in for him, and so they set him up pretty bad. But I think it goes back. We had a
Why
whole
don't we
show on that.
ask Winnie what she believes about? I mean, that we have the opportunity. I'd like to hear Winnie. You've seen all the political turmoil since the day Donald Trump got elected, and as you look at that, it's been one issue after another, nonstop, supported by mainstream media. And you've got the leadership in the House, and you got all this going on. But one thing that has been proven, that's been really turned up, is, like Mark said, General Flynn. It shows that the whole cabal, from Comey, even Biden, Strzok, Page, Susan Rice, there's been this long little mission here to destroy General Flynn. And they took him down for one reason, because he was a Trump confidant, and he didn't like what was going on in the prior administration. So, Winnie, what do you think should happen as an example with General Flynn now? And what do you believe we can do to kind of root out this issue that seemed to be continuing to tear down the president?
Yeah, thank you for that question, James. I remember the end of 2016. It seemed like they had set up the next presidency to be a wartime president, because then they started by kicking off the Russian embassy delegation. They kicked them out of their property there in Maryland, which is where I was actually. I started my whole political career in Maryland. I ran for Maryland State House in 2018, and I'm a very new Missourian. But yeah, I think General Flynn, I read some reports that his intervention in calling up Putin and saying, hey, you don't need to react, you don't need to retaliate. Once Trump comes in, we're going to smooth things over. We know that you did not participate in election interference. I think I've seen reports where in doing that, he prevented World War III.
Yep.
I don't think that's an overstatement. I think General Flynn put himself, his reputation, and his knowledge on the line to prevent an escalation with Russia that would have landed America in the midst of maybe not a hot war, but definitely a Cold War by January 2017. And because of that action, he was targeted, like we've seen now in the notes that have been released by the Director of National Intelligence, and that, thereby forcing Adam Schiff and others to release their own transcripts of what happened. And then in 2018, we got a blue wave. Nancy Pelosi, I don't know how she managed that, but I think it was the ballot harvesting laws that led to a blue wave where some stronghold Republican seats were taken over. And then we got the squad, the four ladies, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Presley, Tlaib, what's her first name? The woman from the Middle East, the Palestinian American woman, and then we have AOC, and they have been the source of so much, they're not really serious women either. So it's like taunting. How St. Paul says, "I have a thorn in my flesh." I feel like that's really what they've been, just like annoying little children, prattling on about how, oh, the president said this about me. Well, you insulted his whole existence and his family and his, everything that he stands for, which is America. And so I think it was so appropriate for the president to label them the squad. But then the
thing about the squad, though, when you follow the money, Soros funded the four squad. Jim, he funded about another 40 other.
Yes, in fact, Winnie and I had talked about that.
Yeah, and so I mean, Soros through, when you're talking about that blue wave, Soros and he put about $2 billion in black money at least to the Caymans for the Hillary election. He could have put $100 billion or $1 trillion. It doesn't matter. They can print the money. I mean, the Soros people, their mob can print the money. So they have unlimited cash. They just print money and our dollars become less. So, I mean, we use
Yeah.
that money. So they have unlimited cash. And I think the only reason Trump won is because he took them by surprise. You know, they could have,
Amen.
they thought, oh, we better let them take 2 or 3%, right? Because they had no
Yes.
idea. And the reason no Trumpsters said they're voting for Trump is because they didn't want to get audited. They didn't want to get fired. They didn't want to have their houses burned down, and they didn't want to, you know, be killed. So Trumpsters aren't that stupid. They know that if you said I'm for Trump, because when I was going around, going door to door and you know, canvassing for Trump, I would go, wow, you're voting for Bernie. And they said, voting for Bernie, yeah, I'll buy you a beer, right? And then if they said, no, I'm not voting for Bernie, I would say, oh, you're voting for Hillary. You're voting for Hillary. Yeah, Hillary. Blankety blankety Trump, right? And if they go, no, I'm not voting for Hillary, then I go, well, who are you voting for? They go, well, I don't know. And I said, well, let's go somewhere quiet and talk. And that was a Trump
Oh,
support.
I see.
Nobody publicly was going to admit that they supported Trump because you'd be killed.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got to look at these same guys, this Schiff, Schumer, this whole bunch. They've been kind of this little cabal. You know, if you look what they did in the gulags and the Holodomor, they killed 12 million people in Ukraine. They killed
right.
another 64 million in Russia. They're the same
right.
bunch. So, I mean, when you see these things, what I see out in the street, that's your typical cabal action. That's your typical Schiff sort
Well,
of.
Mark,
That's how they do it.
I'm wondering if you're doing any door-to-door now, and if you think those silent majority voters have increased in number, or if it's just about the same.
It's very well. I worked on a campaign for against Nancy Pelosi's seat, right? And we had her on the show a couple times, and Deanna Lorraine, and we did some canvassing. But what that group was doing was we were going and cleaning up where the homeless had trash and needles. They were doing cleanups there, and they were threatened with being killed for cleaning up trash, right?
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it's like in San Francisco, I mean, it's almost a joke. If you were a MAGA hat, you'd be killed. I mean, it'd be a death sentence. So it's absolutely out of the question. You know, you couldn't do it.
Right. Hey, well, why don't we go back to Winnie, and Winnie, I'd like to hear what you consider are your hot button issues that bring out your desire to run for the Congress.
Absolutely. Like I started out saying in my introduction, I am a heart woman, you know, a heart for the unborn. I have a life, I have breath, I have a family, and I want to put all that as evidence on the table for the potential that is the unborn. And a lot of atheists, a lot of feminists will say that it's not a child until after birth, or it's not a child until after the first or second trimester. Well, if it has the ability to someday be a Winnie and breathe and speak and have a PhD and a husband and 3 kids, then it's a life that needs protecting. So my very first priority is to pass a personhood amendment. And that amendment will just follow science. Democrats claim to be the party of science, but when it comes to the science of life in the womb, they are very faulty. They are lacking in their knowledge. So I want to say when a life is detected, especially when we can detect a heartbeat, which is very early, around 6 weeks, that person is no longer a part of the mom per se, but that person should be protected by all the laws of the United States of America, especially the 14th Amendment, which guarantees, you know, protection for all people. My second priority is to work on a federal Child Victims Protection Act, because I am Catholic, like James and I talked about at the intro, and I was in DC in 2018 when Cardinal Wuerl was taking some heat, because when he was a bishop in Pennsylvania, he presided over cover-up of clergy who had abused children. And there's abuse everywhere. Yeah. It's just, I don't want abuse in my house of worship. And I'm not about to leave the Catholic Church. So the abusers have to leave.
Right.
So what I did.
There's a lot of things going on in the Catholic Church. And basically after 1962, there's a new church. And before 1962 was the old church, which had been that way for a couple thousand years. And what happened is you had the Polish Pope, who wasn't perfect either. He ignored some things, but he was down in Nicaragua trying to fight the Sandinistas, and he ended up getting shot. He got shot in the head, I think, but he didn't die. And that's the last time a Catholic has fought. And there were people who are what I would say are the part of the cabal, kind of posing as Jesuits. They took over the Catholic Church. So I think
That's right. That's
the new
right.
church is not like the old Catholic Church at all.
Yeah.
If you and the way that it's kind of complex, you translating from Hebrew to Greek to Latin, right? And a lot of stuff was lost. That was the Greek, and actually some of the best translations are actually from Latin because those documents were destroyed. But if you start looking at the translations that come into English for the Bible since 1962, like the most, we talked about this before, like thou shalt not kill. Well, that's not what it says. It says thou shalt not murder, right?
Oh.
And so there's a big difference between thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not murder. Okay, sometimes you have to kill. And in fact, you're not even supposed to commit suicide, right? And also you're required to do self-defense and defense of others. But when they start doing these translations, a lot of the translators try to put in their own opinions, and that happens so much in the last 30 years that it's really strayed away from what was the original scripture.
Yes, Mark. Yeah, you're so correct. But I was getting at the fact that I want a federal Child Victims Act because, for what it's worth, the new church is what most people know. It's what most young people have grown up in. My family actually attends a traditional Latin Mass in St. Louis. We attend St. Francis de Sales Oratory. And, the priest is facing Jesus and we're facing Jesus with him. So we're in the old church, we're old souls. I'm born in 1989, 30 years old. But I think it's time, if you look on my website, winnieheartstrong.vote, I talk about a new American Renaissance. We really need to get back to what it means to be a classical man and woman, to be a classically trained mind. And part of that is getting back to restoring faith in tradition, faith in our faith tradition, which is a Catholic faith tradition, for those of you listening who are Catholic. And to do that, we need to restore faith in the hierarchy. So I petitioned Pope Francis on change.org actually in 2018. I think it's the first time that a petition had ever been directed at the Pope. And it took the Vatican by storm. They were so confused, like, what? There's a petition to the Pope to remove a sitting cardinal? But I did it, and that was very eye-opening for the hierarchy because it exposed them, it exposed the fact that many of them in there have infiltrated the church and are just really, they're saying the words, but there's no faith behind it, is what I found. So after much pressure, the petition got close to 145,000 signatures.
Wow.
I was on all the news outlets. Yeah, thank you. This was 2 years ago. Okay. I was on every news outlet, Fox News, Breitbart, talking about how we need to hold Cardinal Wuerl accountable. He needs to step down. And at that point, he had already submitted his resignation because he had reached the age where you had to retire at 75, but the Pope had not accepted it. So what I was saying, and some other people were saying, is he made a terrible, lack of judgment in shuffling priests around who ended up abusing other young people where they went. And he should just accept that resignation from Wuerl and give us a new cardinal bishop or give us a new bishop. Eventually that was done. So I formed the group Catholic Laity for Orthodox Bishops and Reform. And that group has been active, praying in front of the Vatican Embassy, trying to get the papal nuncio, the new one, Archbishop Christophe Pierre from France, trying to get him to give us a brand new bishop who will do the right thing. And even after we got that bishop, we saw Cardinal Wuerl come back. He was back at, there was a prominent funeral, I forget who died. I think George Herbert Walker Bush, I believe, died, and he was at that funeral. And then he was at the March for Life rally for youth, and we're like, what? He's supposed to just go away. But anyway, we kept trying to make sure that Archbishop Pierre, the papal nuncio, would do the right thing and make sure that the hierarchy, at least present in DC, would be attempting to be clean and attempting to be holy. And I was sad to leave the Archdiocese of Washington. Now I'm in the Archdiocese of St. Louis, and there's much fewer instances of clergy abuse because a lot of those clergy have passed away. But frankly, I still am good friends with James Grine. Mr. Grine is a good friend of mine. We chat very frequently. And James Grine was abused by former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick.
All right.
And the church has still not produced that McCarrick report. It's been 2 years since the Pennsylvania grand jury report was released that shows McCarrick having a hand in abuse of children. I mean, Mr. Grine is now an older man in his 50s, but the wounds on Mr. Grine's soul are just plenty, and on his person, he needs to be protected by the law. So New York has passed the Child Protection Act. I believe Connecticut has passed one too, but we need to elevate child abuse to a federal crime and have a federal law that protects young people in any situation,
Well,
in the
can I ask
classroom.
you, what are the tenets of that law that you have in mind? Because it sounds like it's an excellent law. It should be at the federal level. But what's included in that law that would prevent the type of abuse you're describing?
That's a good question. I think I would need some stronger legal minds to help me with that. But at the very bare minimum, to expand the statutes of limitations would be a necessary part of it, because many states have a window during which you can bring a lawsuit against an abuser. And for many of the people who are abused by clergy, because of the shame and the scandal that
Right.
comes with accusing an authority figure, especially a religious authority figure, they're very slow to bring forth their claims. So we need to give some allowance for that. But I'm not, I am a person of logic and reason. I would not want such a law, such a provision to be used in retaliation against a good man or a good woman or a holy man or a holy woman, holy priest. We've had instances of that in Michigan where priests are falsely accused, and then the investigation is done and we find out that it was a false accusation. In fact, I worked for a time for Archbishop Nienstedt of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he's one of those who suffered terribly. In Minnesota in 2012, there was a marriage amendment campaign that was put, it was an issue campaign, a ballot initiative. And I worked in that campaign to make sure that traditional marriage or natural marriage, defined as between a man and a woman, would be encoded into the Minnesota state constitution. Archbishop Nienstedt was the Archbishop of Minneapolis, St. Paul at the time, and he was very supportive. How? He had the priests offer a prayer for marriage at the end of Mass. He had groups praying. He had groups supporting our campaign out in the open. And after the campaign lost, that was the first year it lost throughout the United States. It had been winning in years prior, in 2009, in 2008, it won across the South. But when the other side mastered our playbook, before we could put out an ad saying children need a mom and a dad, they had an ad out saying, love is love. Doesn't matter who you love. And
Well,
I mean, if you
don't
look
hang
at-
on, Winnie. You don't want to get Mark and I started on that one because
No,
we
well, I'm
know
just saying,
led
if you
that
look at-
into.
if you
Remember
look
the
at the-
gentleman that was elected in 208 who said marriage is between a man and a woman, and then it was I have an evolving perspective on that. As
Yeah.
soon as he got reelected, it's nope. You can be anything you want. You can do whatever you want. Man, woman, dog, transgender.
And
It's-
then we
it's
get
not
Obergefell, correct?
but
Well, I mean, I think, but on the broader perspective, if you look at the 1950s, I mean, first you had the, I guess you call the progressives, killed 84 million people in Europe. And these are not combatants, non-combatants. But you got to understand, when these folks take over, they wipe out basically anybody who can grow a beard. That's usually what they do. And so they killed 12 million Ukrainians, 64 million or so Russians in the gulags. And then they went to China, the same group, same Schumer Schiff cabal. There's no difference to these guys. It was all Mordecai, what was it? Well, Mordecai Marx, who they call Karl Marx, and you had Lev Davidovich Borenstein, who he called himself Leon Trotsky. They always have aliases, but they're the same family. They're all intermarried. And so they killed 84 million people in Europe, and then they went to China and killed 60 million there, right, in the 50s. You got to understand that was a population of 180. So when you kill 60 million people out of a population of 180, you're just basically killing anybody who can grow a mustache, right? You keep the women
Yeah.
and children because they're easier to control. And when you look at the Maoist philosophy or the Marxist philosophy, it's all the same. They're against religion because the government is God, right? And they're against the family because there's no such thing as a father because the government's the father. And they're against private property because basically the Marxists get to decide who gets what. And the way they do it was with mathematics, because if you're a Marxist, 2 plus 2 can be 4 if you're paying a conservative. But if you're paying one of your own, like if you're Nancy Pelosi's cousin and you're getting COVID-19 relief, 2 plus 2 is 5. So basically, if you're a socialist, you get to count the apples. And so it's like 2 plus 2 can be 4 or it can be 5 because there's no 10 commandments. There's no right and wrong. There's no, it's all how you feel about it, right? And so if you feel that this person should only get 1 apple, they get 1 apple, even if they grew all 4, so, that's how they work it. And it's no different what Mao said or Marx said. They all want to destroy 3 things: private property, the family, and any type of religion. I mean, that's always comes out over and over and over again. And even people who are like believing, like Aristotle, maybe you were a pagan, maybe you weren't religious, but they did believe in an afterlife. Now, no Marxist believes in an afterlife. Every one of them thinks this is all we're going to get and get it while you can. And they're, I'm just saying that's a big difference. And I would say there's all kinds of religions, right? But almost all religions believe in an afterlife. And so, but they want to get rid of that and just, it's all happening right now and this is it. And that's what makes them successful. So it's always in different colors and different flavors, but it's, they want to eliminate private property, the family, and religion. And it always comes to the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's a difference in my candidacy and the people who are supporting me. It's really a Christian renaissance, a Christian resurgence in American life. Because a lot of Christians for the last few years have just backed out of political involvement. They've gone back to their churches and practiced the right to worship, which is not the same thing as freedom of religion. But now they're seeing that even the right to worship, which is to go into a closed space and pray to God how you deem fit, is being attacked. And I'm coming with that fervor. I pray in the name of Jesus all the time. If Ilhan Omar and Talib and Rashida can say all kinds of things they want to say on their Instagram and Facebook and call on Allah every other sentence, then I can call on the name of Jesus. And I do it often, and I'm not ashamed of it at all. I think we need to get back to a place where we're understanding that the political sphere is also under the lordship of Jesus. It's under the lordship of the Almighty. And when we recede from that, when we accept this false idea of a separation between church and state, then we are murdering the very freedom of the republic. So I'm coming as a young 30-year-old woman. Hopefully I have a long tenure ahead of me, whether we win this race or not, where I am saying we need to bring back, like Kanye West said, we need to bring back prayer in schools. Kanye was good about that. He did that for his interview, I think, over the weekend. He also said we need to.
Now. So Kanye,
that's right. Yeah,
well,
he said if you bring back prayer in schools.
About that is that there's nothing in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, anywhere, anything. I think that was there was a certain Supreme Court that decided that, Blackburn Court, I think, but there was nothing in there that says there's a separation between church.
Yeah, wasn't Black a Mason? I mean, these people are terrible.
It shall not be infringed, but that is kind of like, that is what you call the living Constitution. The living Constitution is kind of like you have a mortgage and you're supposed to pay $3,000 a month, and you go, the living mortgage, I'm only going to pay you $20 a month, but I'm still going to survive here. Like a living Constitution. I mean, the Constitution was written for the 9th grade level at that time, which is about a high school or a freshman in college, because education is not what it used to be.
That's right.
But the Constitution is not that complicated, and you'd be surprised how many people haven't read it. It's only like 14 pages, but there's nothing in there about, you can't have God or there's no religion. It says your right to worship should not be infringed. How you got that flipped over so you can't be religious or it's not allowed to?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how they
You
got
know,
to that.
it's so funny because
It's a
I
real
greet
pretzel
people all
logic.
the
Pretzel
time.
logic. What's that? Pretzel
Yeah.
logic by, I think it was the, the Blackburn court, the same thing about 65. And
Yeah.
you got to understand that, there was a lot of legislating from the Supreme Court and from the courts. And that kind of twisted the Constitution so you wouldn't even really know what it is. And if you look at Ginsburg, right, she said, our Constitution should be like the South African Constitution. I don't know if you've read the South African Constitution.
I have a whole dissertation on South Africa.
Wow, you're
It's a
just
scary
all over the
Constitution.
place.
It's a scary Ginsburg thinks that's the
Well, I
Constitution.
did my dissertation on Nelson Mandela because
Wow.
I'm named after his wife,
Well,
Winnie Mandela.
Well,
So it was a natural
Congratulations.
return.
Well, I don't know. The Winnie, I don't really have the greatest. She had the Winnie Mandela necklace, which wasn't the most pleasant thing.
No, she wasn't perfect at all. But
No, she wasn't
understand
perfect
that
at all.
in 1988, when my parents conceived me, and when I was born in '89, they were very much in the consciousness of, African power and Pan-Africanism and free Nelson Mandela. So I got slapped with the name
Winnie, I wanted to thank you for coming on tonight. I allowed the show to go a little long because I love everything you're saying. I'm a huge fan already, and I wish I could vote in Missouri. You'd have my vote, and you'd have my family's vote. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
But anyway, listen. If possible, maybe we can have you back. If you,
yes,
as long
Okay,
as
so you have an election coming up pretty soon.
But we're at the end of our show, and I wanted to thank you. And Mark, I'm sure has something nice
what is
to
the
say.
date? What is the date of the election there, Winnie? Before we sign off,
It's August 4th. August 4th.
August 4th. Okay, so we're all going to be rooting for you for August 4th. Go ahead and win this one for us.
Please, Winnie. Please, we need you.
Okay. God bless you guys.
But anyway, thank you so much tonight, Winnie. And I am so happy to hear you talk about religion making the comeback, the Renaissance, because that is going to help every aspect of society.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you so much, Winnie.
Okay, goodbye. God bless.
Go there and win on August 4th.
Yes,
right,
sir.
Good luck.
Thank you.